close, webcam, microphone, up close.
At the age of 19 in 1962, she was a...
But I have the files. I read this stuff at the National Archives, and I read these other things. I said to myself, how can that be possible? The brain, pistols and fondle slap of choice, and computers, internet, professional wrestlers, and not just Ventura style. It doesn't matter where the information comes from as long as it's real. It's hard to get real information because seriously, they don't want you to have just read two sources whenever I try to prove out. It's not. If you expect your government to tell you the truth, you're going to be sadly disappointed. Another one of these things.
Dear Lord, what a dirty, dirty old man, huh?
Really? Can't be serious. Is this really how you want things to be? Come on. More hooker, eruptions, eruptions, whatever.
Like Dave Powers kind of...
Really?
Allegedly broadcast live from FEMA Region 2. Within the borders of the formerly united and currently occupied states of America, we bring you the Ochelli Effect.
It's like, damn sure, no, I'm an original. We have all these situations. I'd love to know why it takes 50 years, for
that.
For a 19-year-old girl to eventually get up to gumption to put these things out.
And that is certainly that. It is the 12th day of February 2015 on UCY.TV radio. This is the Ochelli Effect, as the obnoxious bumper tells you. I'm your host, Chuck Ochelli. Anyway, I want to thank everybody for tuning in tonight, whether you came to us through the website at ucy.tv/TOE, or if you decided to pick us up on your TuneIn apps or whatever else it is you're utilizing. There we go with the little trip over the tongue real quick. And tonight my guest is somebody that I'm not entirely familiar with, but he's an author and made some interesting statements recently and has caused some interesting discussions to happen privately among some of the listeners to this program that don't necessarily call in or post or chat or whatever else. Let's see what we got. Let's see if we can bring him on in. All right. Anyway, as I was saying, it's pretty interesting to see how all of these things sort of unfold behind the scenes. A lot of people suggested that I speak to Mr. Muckler, and we don't need the video. So if you want to cut the video, because it'll hamper the sound a little bit, Mr. Muckler.
Okay.
Sorry about that. But live radio, everybody. Thank you.
I'm doing good.
Live radio, everybody. As I was saying, he's an author and definitely somebody of interest because, like I said, it sparked a bunch of conversation when I just started looking at some of his posts on social media and stuff like this. Apparently, you recently did a show with Roger Landry, who my listeners are real familiar with. He's on with me every Tuesday, the man who runs the Liberty Beacon Project. All that kind of good stuff. But how are you doing tonight, Mr. Muckler?
I'm doing very well, thank you. And I listened to the your Tuesday show with Roger and then Dr. Ford on the second hour. So very, very enlightening, very great. Liked it.
Well, definitely appreciate that. I'm not, and here's the weird thing, and this is going to be an odd kind of show for me because I haven't actually read your book. I have read a portion of it, okay, because there's a little bit of it out there online, and there's also some other stuff out there, but so I'm coming at you completely cold here. There's no way I have any background or anything else, so here's what I want to do is try and explain to my listeners who you are first, and I guess we'll just start there. So who is Bill Muckler?
Okay, I guess I can give you a little bit of a resume. I was born and raised in St. Louis, Missouri. Went to the same elementary school, same high school, same college, University of Missouri in Columbia. Never changed schools. Had wonderful mother and father. They stayed together for a lifetime. After I graduated from Missouri, I was in a position where I was going to be drafted, and I dodged the draft by joining the Marine Corps and was accepted into the officer candidate course and commissioned a second lieutenant in the Marine Corps. And I say that because when I was commissioned a second lieutenant in the Marine Corps, I took an oath to defend and support the Constitution of the United States of America. And I still to today regard that oath as being sacred. And so that sort of is my guiding light, I guess to say, or my beacon or my compass of who I am and what I stand for and the direction I'm going in. So anyway, after almost 5 years in the Marine Corps, I had a top secret security clearance, was involved in intelligence somewhat, was a senior air director for a air control squadron, achieved the rank of captain. Then when I was released from active duty, honorable discharge, stayed in the reserves for another 11 years. And in the meantime, I started a business in St. Louis, a typography business. So I got to know the graphic arts industry pretty well. But when that industry changed technologies very rapidly, I was offered a position with a consulting firm, which I took, and that's what I've been doing for about the last 40 years. And so I used all of my knowledge and principles and techniques that I learned and developed throughout my consulting career and working with companies, helping them understand how better to operate, how to streamline their operations and so forth, to look at the federal government of the United States of America and say, this is bloated, it's dysfunctional, and no one would design a company to run like that. And if they did, they would go bankrupt, they would be out of business. And I know how to do this with companies. I've worked with very large companies, I've worked with small companies, all kinds of organizations, hospitals, healthcare, food, etc. And so I took about the task of how would I run the federal government if it was a business. And so I used all of my business tools, principles and techniques of root cause analysis, cost-benefit analysis, base data statistical analysis, all those things, and I applied them to every part of the United States federal government. Now, I've been following the government and politics all my life, so this was not a subject that I was not familiar with. I'm very familiar with how they operate, and I guess my whole life has been involved in how do things work, how do things operate, and so that's where I'm coming from on this. So when you say you had, go ahead.
Sorry, in a way, you're sort of like an administrative mechanic. You're the kind of guy who figures out what's wrong with the engine of the business, as it were. You took a good look at our government, and I hold up air quotes for the radio listeners when I say our government at this point, because I don't feel as though I'm actually represented by any part of it anymore. But but the thing is that you saw a very inefficient machine. You see all kinds of business practices that, as you very aptly note, would not be acceptable, possible, or even remotely sustainable in a private industry, and this is what you concerned yourself with this book, which is called 2020, A Clear Vision for America.
Yes, and when I wrote the book, I did not write it from the viewpoint of a political party. It has nothing to do with Republicans, Democrats, or independents. I did not write it from a point of view of an ideology, conservative, moderate, liberal, socialist, or whatever. I merely went about it by looking at it as objectively as I possibly could and said, how should the United States run for Americans? What's the best course for Americans? And what I found is when I people would ask me, tell me about this book you're writing, and you're in a similar situation in that we just really published a book the end of December, and it's out as an ebook. We're on Barnes and Noble right now. We're in the process of getting it formatted for various other sites like Amazon.com. It's on a few other electronic book sites, Smashwords, for example. And our next task is to get it in print form. That way, you and everybody else will be able to take a look at. But for example, you can go to Barnes and Noble and you can just click on the, type in 20/20 colon, A Clear Vision for America. The book comes up, and you can click on I want to read it, sample. And you can just start reading it right there. You don't have to put your name in or anything like that, or a credit card number. You can read the first, I guess it's about the first 20% of the book. So
Yeah,
anyway,
that's exactly what I did because I haven't been able to get myself a copy yet. But I did go to Amazon and or was Barnes and Noble. I'm sorry, I think it was Barnes and Noble where you get the sample, or is it Amazon? Which one is it?
It's Barnes and Noble. We're in the process of formatting for Amazon. Amazon.com requires a special format, and my son has been helping me with this. He's a technical genius in the family, and so he's in the process of doing that. It's a very painstaking process. You almost have to go through it word by word. The book is 90,000 words, so they have it formatted just exactly the way they want it. And he's also doing the same thing for iBooks, which is an Apple application.
Yeah, no, I know about that because my friend Walt Brown published a 30,000 page chronology. Okay, and Amazon required a very special sort of formatting. You can imagine the nightmare that was. The index of his JFK assassination chronology is actually 3,000 pages long all by itself. So you can imagine what that task was like. It had to be broken into different pieces, and yeah, it is a special process. Publishing has changed, and you mentioned that that typography was one of your businesses at one point. That really creates an interesting question too, because you're able to look at the landscapes of things. This gives you a greater understanding of the conditions in different parts of the country when you're looking at the topography. And there's a word that hardly anybody even understands anymore, right? I mean, they might vaguely understand that this is about map making at some point. But I'm just curious, what else did you do regarding that? I mean, were there surveys for particular purposes, or did you cover the whole gambit when it came to that?
No, actually, I think I misled you when I probably wasn't speaking very clearly. It was a typography business. So we were, in a sense, typesetters for printers and publications and advertising agencies, art studios, and so forth. So
I understand.
Yeah, so topography it almost sounds exactly the same. I'm sorry.
Yeah, well, that's what I thought I heard. I'm sorry. That's my bad ears, my bad eyesight as well. But ears are apparently going too. I guess that happens with a little bit of age. Anyway, so what you did is you decided to take a look at this, without entering into the emotional side of the political spectrum, to really take a look at the functionality. I mean, where do you begin with that kind of a mess? Because, I mean, look, we've all focused on, and I've done it several times on this show, about the inefficiencies when it comes to, like, say, the CDC. We've talked about the inefficiencies of the Veterans Administration, the abominable situation there. We've talked about a lot of things like this. Clearly, there's an administrative problem which is endemic in the entire system when it comes to the business of our ostensive government. Where did you begin to analyze this? Because, I mean, you couldn't have just taken the whole thing in one shot. I mean, it would have been overwhelming. What was your real jumping off point for examining that?
Chuck, you're the first person that's ever asked me that, and I'm delighted that you did. I had in my mind, I wrote the book in my mind, actually, and I wrote it chapter by chapter, although I didn't realize at the time that I had written chapters in my mind. And I tried to contact various political parties, national committees, congressmen, senators, and so forth, and share my solutions with them, because the book is all about the solutions to these issues. No one would listen to me, in fact, but they all did respond to, every time I wrote to them, they responded with a farm letter requesting donations. So, I got to give them that. They at least did that for me. But anyway,
well, they can easily acknowledge you to ask you for money. I mean, that's
Yeah, so I wondered if I gave them $25, they'd think that my solution was a $25 solution. But if I gave them $1,000, maybe they'd have thought it was a $1,000 solution. I don't know. In any case, I wrote the book because I've never written a book before. I don't consider myself an author. I consider myself a problem solver. So I wrote the book in terms of a consulting team, that how would they go about addressing this problem. And so there's some dialogue that they have amongst themselves, and they finally agree the place we have to start is the economy of the country, because the economy is what drives everything. We have a capitalist economy. There's no question about it. I didn't try to change anything there. I just said, okay, this is what we have. And so if we don't have money, we can't fund schools, we can't fund the military, we can't do anything. So we have to have money. So I looked at the economy, and okay, what's wrong with the economy? And so I used that as a starting off point. The economy, then my consultants discussed, well, the first thing we have to really do is we have to have a budget. And I looked at the budget process, and the budget process is ridiculous. It's abominable how they go about it. I don't think anybody there really knows what they're doing. I think all they're really trying to do is trying to figure out how they can bring some money back home, bring the pork home so they can get reelected. And they all have their buddies in there. And so if a guy in California says, hey, if you vote for my bill, I'll vote for your bill. And the guy in Florida says, okay, we don't have anything in common, but yeah, I'll support you if you support me. And that's how things pretty much get done. And that's why we're suffering so much, because no one has taken the approach in government to say what's best for America and America's people. And that's what I did. So we started off with the economy, on how to make a budget. And then we said, okay, if we have this much money, how are we going to spend the money? And so then I broke it out in chapters. So we would have, and I did it in 20 chapters. The whole thing about 2020 has nothing to do with eyesight or vision or hindsight or looking forward or anything like that. The book is all built on the number 20. So, for example, 20 chapters. Each chapter has a solution. Some of them I combined, some things like science and healthcare research. I combine that into a chapter, for example. But it starts out with addressing the tax situation. So there's a chapter on taxes. There's a chapter on education, poverty, immigration, foreign relations, everything you can think of. There's actually about 27 specific items that I addressed, and I tried to put them in order so that a person could go through the book and they could say, okay, I see what he's building on. And every chapter I wrote, I formatted exactly the same way. I start out by giving some background and history of that specific issue, for example, education, and then I give statistical analysis. I lived on government websites, and I found out they're the most ridiculous things anybody could ever find. None of them agree with each other. Everything is lagging. It's outdated. It's inaccurate. But the best I could, I found out, okay, how much are we spending on education, and where are we spending it, and so forth. For example, we spend about $600 billion in this country on education every year. Only about $300 billion of that, half of it goes to instruction. Where's the other $300 billion go? So that's how I went about addressing it. Okay, what are we doing? Why are we doing all this?
Well, here's something that occurs to me here. You're addressing a lot of the waste, and of course, this is something that needs to be addressed, needs to be handled. I'm wondering if at any point you considered also examining the system by which our Federal Reserve works and the money creation system in and of itself. Did you consider that when you were looking at
Oh
the?
yes, I have a chapter dedicated to the, and I'm going to use quotes, the Fed unquotes, and
Mhm.
I what I found though is people would say, well, like they would ask me, just my friends, and we'd be sitting around having a beer or barbecue or something. They'd say, well, what about the Fed? What do you think about that? And I'd give them my solution, and then they would say, oh, you can't do that. That's impossible because everybody has their own paradigms, and everybody is locked into those paradigms. They have paradigm paralysis. And one thing I learned throughout my career is you have to think outside the box. So I thought outside the box. So I went in and I dug in and found out everything I could on the Fed. And what I found was, and I've been studying this for years anyway, so and I've read, many, many books on the Fed, is the Fed's got to go.
Well,
It's got to go.
you ever read The Creature from Jekyll Island?
Oh yeah, I read that a long time ago. Griffin's book, yeah, an excellent book.
Absolutely an excellent book, and this is the thing. I mean, because I'm sitting here and I'm thinking to myself, you had to have examined that because, the creation of money having hamstrung the system to begin with, already sort of handicapping it, as it were, right out of the gate. There's no way to get around dealing with the Fed if you want to make things more efficient, because that's another one of these abominations that is just an acceptable thing at this point among most people. I mean, not the listeners to my show. We all have a pretty, sour attitude when it comes to the Federal Reserve, that's for sure. But I mean, the inefficiencies there are striking, and that's before any of this money gets distributed anywhere. So I'm glad to hear that you did examine that as well, and you actually have a solution. And I know what you mean about people pushing back about it, because anytime that I even begin to discuss a solution, I pretty much get shouted down by people on one side of the argument or the other, and the two sides that I'm identifying here are the people that either believe that the Fed is one of these things that simply cannot be extracted from the equation whatsoever, or people that believe we should just destroy it now and let the chips fall where they may, regardless of what happens. And I don't believe that either solution in the extreme is productive here. But I'm curious about what your solution would be, and I, of course, don't want to give away everything in your book. But and I know I'm jumping ahead on you a little bit here, but I'm really curious about the basics behind what your solution to the Federal Reserve issue is.
Well, it's really very simple. We need to go back to Congress, according to the Constitution, is responsible for the currency of the United States of America, and Congress needs to take that over. And I go back and I give the readers the research. I tried to keep it, somewhat brief because I didn't want to lose anybody. But the Fed wasn't enacted until 1913, and actually, when you mentioned the creature Jekyll Island, that all happened right down, near where I live in 1911, and it was bankers and politicians who decided they wanted to manipulate the currency of the United States for whatever purposes they had in mind.
Woodrow Wilson didn't sign it into existence until I think the 23rd of December in 1913. It didn't actually, but of course that meeting occurred more than a year before. Mm-hmm. And the interesting part about that, of course, is that we see it sort of getting underway as far as being active in 1914. Coincidentally, we find ourselves enthralled in the First World War right afterwards, which is, a curious distinction. Of course, I don't want to get into drawing all these lines with you, but just for contextual purposes, there you go. And but the functionality of this problem is that, we begin with something that's already sort of taxed vicariously by the mechanism of interest. And this is what the problem is now. Of course, yes, the Congress was supposed to be in charge and to empower, the Bureau of Engraving and all of that, in order to actually print our money based on, based on a sort of a long set of criteria, and all of that was handed over, not for the first time in our history in 1913, actually for the third time in our history, as brief of a history as we have in this country. It was the third time that a centralized bank was again handed the issuance of our money as one of its, as one of its functions, but this is a huge problem, right?
Yes, it is, and I'm glad you brought it up because it is the Fed is the third creation, and the other two obviously failed dismally and led our country into Argentinian-style runaway inflation. So that's what stopped it before. And speaking of inflation, I think your readers will be astounded to find out that when they set the baseline for the Consumer Price Index, which really is not a measure of inflation, but that's what everybody is used to talking about. At 9% back 100 years ago, it's now, I think, 290-something%. I have all the statistics in the book. Let me say something about, in developing the book, when any of my friends, I found out two things. When anyone ever asked me about the book and they'd ask me for a solution, I'd give it to them. They were not able to think outside the box, and they would say, well, that'll never work. That's stupid. You're an idiot to think that. But if I then took them through and I said, okay, here's the chapter, and I took them through the entire process, they'd say, oh, you're absolutely right. Chuck, 100% of the people, when they first look at a solution, they'll say that will never work. But when you give them all of the backup information and you prove your points with them, and they make sense points, they'll say, "Oh yeah, I see it now." And
right, that is one of the things that needs to be done, and that's the purpose of laying these things out, because a lot of times the solution, in contrast to the current situation, appears so divergent from reality, as it were, that it seems almost impossible. And that's why I'm very curious about your solution to the Fed thing, because yes, we do need to take back our privilege of printing money, as it were. If we're going to even stand a chance, I believe, at correcting our economic woes as they stand. Mm-hmm. But what mechanism? Because see, now you've got me in this point where I'm thinking to myself, well, what steps are we talking about here? And don't worry, I won't just linger on this particular topic, but it was the first thing that jumped out at me when you were talking about going back to the beginning on this.
Yes, yeah. I don't know if your listeners would want to get into a detailed discussion of the mechanisms and the mechanics of the Fed and the monetary system and how we're now operating on fiat money. That I guess everybody knows that we're making money, we're printing money out of thin air, but nobody understands the ramifications of it or how it's destroying the country. Actually, let me change the subject on you a little bit.
Okay.
When I first came up with this, it wasn't to transform America. That's not what I had in mind. What I really had in mind is I wanted to see America the way I thought it should be, the way it should be, the way it could be, the way it can be. And I wanted to see how we could keep this country and its Constitution alive for another 239 years or more, and maybe 1,000 years or more. And right now, Chuck, our country is passing away. I hope that I'm not shocking any of your listeners, but we're dying. We really are. And we're on the verge of bankruptcy. And when we hit $20 trillion in national debt, and I go into this in the book, and when our gross domestic product is outstripped by the national debt, we are on the verge of bankruptcy. And when we go bankrupt, this country is gone because the fiat currency we have will have absolutely no value at all. In fact, right now I think Hasbro's money has more value than the Federal Reserve note. And if you know what I mean by Hasbro money, they're the people that make the Monopoly game.
Well, right, and and this is the thing. I mean, I say it on my show all the time, and people are sick of hearing me say it. But here's the truth. I mean, I believe I'm a little bit younger than you, and here's the thing. I would really like to see the country that I was told about when I was growing up reemerge, because over my lifetime, and I was only born in the very first few years of the '70s. In my lifetime, all I have seen is the decay and decline of what I was told this country was supposed to be. And that is all there is to it. So this is no shock to anybody that we are, on the verge of I shudder to use words like collapse. I shudder to use words like, the complete disillusionment of what was. But in reality, that's where we're at from a financial standpoint. And that is where we're at in a whole lot of other ways, too, in my opinion. We're really on the precipice of, falling into a chasm that we don't have a flashlight bright enough to see our way through, even on the way down. So you'll have no disagreement or argument with me there. Okay. I guarantee you that.
The cultural aspects of the country right now are just as bad are in as much trouble as the financial aspects are. And what we're seeing is a society that's being changed so gradually that we just keep getting used to more and more degradation of our society. Many Americans are concerned about this country's direction, and I'm certainly one of them. But a lot of people in the country just see this as a place to exist, to go through life from one event to the next with meaningless desires, no meaningful goals. They just want to, just live and don't pay attention to anything. They have no idea who their representatives or their senators are. Most of them don't even know who the vice president is, although that's probably a good thing. But in any case, people, and then when I talk to people, I ask people questions, and they look at me like a deer in the headlights. Like I'll say, who was President Washington's Secretary of Education? And they look at me like, how would I know that? I don't know anything about that. We never studied that in school. I said, well, who was Jefferson's Secretary of Education? Don't know that either. What about Lincoln's? Then I say, well, did you know that we didn't ever have a Secretary of Education until 1979 when the department was founded and signed into law by President Jimmy Carter? Mm-hmm. They look at me and they say, you're crazy. That's not true. And they tell me, well, you just don't get it, and just go with the flow, Bill. That's okay. It is what it is. And when I hear those things, it just drives me crazy. I just go nuts because I can't stand when people say, it is what it is. If it ain't broke, don't fix it. That type of attitude when we're not going to have a country for our kids to thrive in and be successful in. And that's really what my whole life is all about, my whole book is all about. How can we make this thing so we have the right kind of environment for our children and our children's children to be successful in life? And right now, everything I hear about is most of the kids that go to college are living in their parents' basement. If they got a job, they're working as a waiter or something like that. We don't have scientists creating things. We don't have engineers. We don't have an economy that's setting the right environment for people to succeed.
Well, right. The whole of the environment, culturally, from a business standpoint, from a vocational standpoint in this country, is entirely degraded to the point where nothing exists like the structures that again, I was told about when I was a child, the opportunity, the ability, upward mobility, the possibility, the contemplation about the American dream, about being able to succeed, about you could do or be anything you wanted to be. If you put in the right amount of work, if you got yourself some education, if you worked hard enough, you could accomplish. That was the thing, and that's really no longer the case, based on a lot of the conditions we have. In my estimation, anyway.
Exactly. Anyway, my vision of America is not the America we have today. It just isn't it. And I feel like I have 20/20 eyesight when it comes to what America could be and what America should be. And I remember the excitement of when we had the space program going on and we were launching astronauts into space and satellites and so forth. Everybody in the nation was galvanized by this. We were excited about it. Everybody wanted to be involved in something. They wanted to have jobs. And it's not like that anymore. We don't have anything that pulls the country together. And my book is the solutions, is the escape plan to bring us all together by solving all these various problems. And as we do that, we pull everybody together. And the theme of the book is really to bring everybody together with all of these solutions.
Going back to the education, because this is really where the genesis of a lot of the problem is. Like you said, you were looking at the way that the business of education is run, the administration, and the costs of it. You basically said half of the money doesn't even go toward the actual operation of education to begin with. It doesn't go toward instruction. There's a whole lot of other things that go on. And the inefficiencies that have been built up, these things didn't appear overnight either. These things have all been sort of incrementally introduced into the situation. What sort of solutions did you offer regarding education? I mean, again, I'm asking you to sort of codify this really quickly, but I mean, give us an idea of what your solutions are to the education, because of course people nowadays are talking about Common Core and the disaster of accepting subpar results regarding education. Some people complain about the tenure system with teachers, things like this. But where did you come down on that?
Okay, what I found was, and you're right, about 50% of the money that's spent on education is for instruction, and 50% goes someplace else. Some of that 50% that goes to other places, and I have it all listed in the book, is necessary. I mean, obviously, a school needs a principal and a janitor and so forth. I guess if what it boils down to is the parents have to be involved in school, and the only way parents are going to be involved in the education of their students is we're going to have to go to a type of voucher system. Now, I also laid out the types of courses we need to teach, and our students right now are failing. If you look at statistics, we have gone from being the leader in the world as far as our students' test scores are concerned. Over the last 40 or 50 years since we created the Department of Education, we've gone to being like maybe the 10th best to now. For example, math, science, reading, those subjects, we're in the 20s now. In fact, I think in science we're 29th, or one of the subjects we're 29th in. 29th in the world, that means 28 countries have students that excel at these subjects better than our students do. And we spend more money than any other country in the world on education, and yet our results are floundering. So we need to go to a type of voucher type system where parents can choose the schools they want their kids to go to, and then those schools are going to have to compete with each other so they can draw in the students that they want. And so we need to go at it from that point of view. But I'm afraid when I say that, people are going to say, oh, that'll never work, you can't do that. But if you read the chapter, you'll see, oh yeah, that's exactly what we have to do because there's a lot of detail in going into how messed up it is. Anyway,
Well,
let me.
one of the first things that somebody says when you talk about a voucher system regarding the education for obviously your school age children, not your college students directly, but I mean just for that, one of the arguments immediately is that the existing public schools would be virtually abandoned because almost everybody would want to take their vouchers and bring them to the better schools as they stand now, and would sort of create a disequilibrium among the public schools. And I don't know. I never know what to say to that exactly because that seems to make a lot of sense to me. Is that listen, if I had a voucher where I could put my kids anywhere, and I've got kids at varying ages now. I've got I've got one in high school, I've got one in middle school, and I've got a 7-month-old. So all over the map here as to what their potential could be, and I've seen the downfall of public education from my daughter's experiences, in my estimation. But I look forward to it and think to myself, well, if I were in that situation where I could have a voucher and take my son anywhere, I probably would not allow him to set foot in any of the public schools where my daughter did. And I bet you there's a lot of other parents that would do the very same thing, try and relocate their kids to the already existing better schools, and then, what would that leave us with except the completely uninvolved and unmotivated parents and their children subsisting in what would be left of the public schools. So what do you think about that?
I think you're asking a very astute question, and my answer to that is going to sound rather flippant, but what's the most important thing that we can do for our children? Get them a great education or send them to a school that we bailed out because they were so inefficient and so screwed up that they couldn't operate on their own, but we'll just keep throwing some public money at them and keep bailing them out. Isn't the public school systems, aren't those schools being bailed out pretty much the way we did banks and institutions about 6 years ago? And we've done throughout the last 50 years. Every time something fails, we bail it out instead of just saying, let it crash and burn and let somebody come in that knows what they're doing and be competitive and operate it the way it should be operated. So I have no dog in this fight because my kids are already gone to school. My grandkids are through school, so it doesn't make a whole lot of difference to me. But I'm looking out for the future of the children of America, and bailing out public schools, I have no sympathy for that. It makes no sense to do that.
No, and I absolutely think that's exactly what has to happen. Is that we have to allow things that deserve to fail. Especially when it comes to any business, and whether that's a school or it's a bank or anything else. I think allowing things to fail is necessary. And believe me, we could have a long discussion about that bailout from a few years ago. But anyway, I'll let you continue on about the education.
So what's the best thing for America? Our kids fail, or the public school system fail? And actually, I had quite a conversation with Roger Landry on this, and Roger got a kick out because I referred to them as government indoctrination centers as opposed to public schools. And so anyway, the government indoctrination centers, if they can stand on their own 2 feet, then I think people will take their vouchers to them, and they'll send their kids there. But if they can't stand on their own 2 feet, and the parents don't want that kind of education for their children, then they'll find a better school to go to, and those schools will thrive because they'll be competitive. America's built on competition, and Americans are competitive people. We're very generous people, we're very caring people, but we're very competitive people. Look at how we regard our sports. I mean, we go crazy over the home teams, right?
Right.
And, and that brings up something else that I mentioned in the book. When we go to the ball game, Everybody's rooting for the home team. You don't sit next to a guy and say, "Hey, you're a Democrat and I'm a Republican. Shut up. I don't want to hear you rooting for the team. You want everybody to root, right?" So why would we let the politicians divide us? Anyway, I'm digressing. My whole book is really about, I think, a much bigger picture than just the solutions. The solutions are that's the mechanics of it. The strategy of the country, the culture of the country is really what my passion is. And my vision is to see the country get back to where people were excited about the country and they wanted the country to do great and they wanted to be involved in it. They wanted to help each other. They wanted to do things for each other and so forth. So anyway, let me say something here. Mm-hmm. A society grows great when old men plant trees whose shade they know they shall never sit in. So that's me. I'm the old guy that's planting this tree, or these trees, these shade trees for the young ones. I know I'm not going to sit in them, but I don't care. I want them to sit in the shade. Now, that's an old Greek proverb, and it means a lot of things to a lot of people and so forth, but here's a different way to think about it. Instead of saying a society grows great when old men plant trees whose shade they know they shall never sit in, America grew great 239 years ago when our founders planted the mighty shade trees of Constitution, ownership, entrepreneurship, freedom, and liberty for their children and their children's children to enjoy, to sit in the shade of those trees. But unfortunately, these mighty shade trees of Constitution, etc., that I mentioned, they're in peril because corrupt politicians and greedy bankers have slowly but surely cut down these shade trees that shielded us and protected us. And what's happened is they've used apathy to hack away at all the shade branches and so forth, and they're leaving us stripped out here in the boiling sun to fend for ourselves, not knowing where the next dollar is going to come from, not knowing if the country's going to go bankrupt or not. And that's what my solutions are for, but my solutions are just the tools to get us to the point where we can have the kind of country we need for our kids. And we have to educate the kids, and then we have to give them an opportunity to create new technologies, new products, new goods and services, new economies, new everything, and so they can forge into the future. And right now we're not doing that. We're not giving them that opportunity.
Oh, right. Using the tree as the analogy here, we have to give them fertile ground to work with. So we've got to really start with the dirt and not even the trees. And the dirt has become extremely contaminated with all of this corruption and really perversion of what the original intent of our governmental system was. Okay. And there I absolutely agree with you, and this is definitely a part of what needs to be addressed. Now, we talked about education a bit. Moving forward in the book, though, what other aspects do you start to cover after we talk about education, which is obviously part of the foundation of the future, is how our kids are educated. I mean, they're going to reflect that later in how they conduct themselves, how they interact, what they allow to happen, and all of this other kind of thinking. So the future from the educational standpoint makes perfect sense. What's the next area that you get into?
Well, education is really tied. I think poverty is tied to education. I've never seen a well-educated person want to be poor and live in poverty. So that's another area that we need to address, and that leads into more areas. See, all these things are really interrelated. They're all interconnected. You have to do all of them. You can't do one thing and then and not do anything else, do another thing or whatever. That's what our politicians do today, because they either don't know any better or they have their own secret agenda, which is reelection in most cases. They play whack-a-mole. The mole pops his head up, they whack that one down, and more and more pop up and so forth. They never really solve anything permanently. So poverty is an issue that must be addressed. My 2020 plan addresses poverty, and we can take poverty from a level of about 16% down to less than 1 or 2% without any problems at all. It can be done in a period of 3 or 4 years. Do you realize that our poverty level has remained the same over the last 50 years since 1965 when President Johnson instituted these Great Society, which was supposed to combat poverty? Poverty level is the same, but we've spent, what, $4 or $5 trillion on it, and what did we get for it? We ended up same as we were before. So that's another issue. I look at job training, and I know how to train the people of this country. And what we have to do is we got to start a training program where we start training the kids coming right out of high school and give them training and let them earn money and get some basic type training that they can use, and then use that to go into fields of their choice, or maybe if they don't know what kind of job or career they want, they can get counseling through the training program, and then go to work as like interns, working for companies that they'll learn on the job how to work and put these training programs together. Nobody's ever done this before in this country. I guess we had something like that when we had the back in the 1930s with those social programs to put people to work. But in any case, that's something else. Immigration, the 2020 plan for immigration is far and away superior to anything the politicians have ever come up with. Solve that problem, have it up and running in less than a year's time. No question about it. It's basically a 4-point program that covers everything.
Well, now let me just ask you something here, because I've got a little problem with the idea that poverty levels have remained the same, and I'll tell you why. It seems to me as though there's been a great deal of statistical manipulation, okay, which causes people to believe that the poverty level is actually very similar to what it was in 1965, but I don't think it is, because what has happened is, like, for instance, the idea of the unemployment statistics, right? That's a joke at this point in time. You know, there are people that have dropped off of the unemployment rolls who simply don't count anymore. The rate of joblessness, and the rate of unemployment are two different things.
Absolutely.
And the thing, like, it's a completely different climate even from then, because, okay, as a minimum wage worker about now, you earn about $8 an hour, okay? Something like that, varies from state to state, obviously, and all that. But there is also the idea that when, the minimum wage was $1.25, okay, you were able to buy a whole lot more. Two people working minimum wage jobs could, theoretically pay their rent, could buy some groceries, could do just about everything they needed to do if they were able to find full-time employment, even with a minimum wage job. That, at this point in time, is not even a possibility, because the economics of the situation have changed so that inflation has far outpaced wages. So I don't see how the poverty level could remain the same, from the standpoint of a percentage or anything else, when you have that sort of a change in the climate. I'm wondering what you think of that.
I think you hit the nail on the head. You hit a home run on this one. And again, it's in the book. And what's happened is poverty, in a sense, is relative, because we all know that people in some of the countries like Somalia and Africa and so forth, their poverty level is completely different than the poverty level here. Uh, the, but I'm just going by government statistics on this. I try to keep it as objective as possible and just look at, okay, here's the facts. So anyway, we have people who earn or have an income that falls below the poverty level. Actually, income is probably not a very good key indicator of poverty. But anyway, that's what we have, and that's what I address. So anyway, by training people and getting them better jobs, they're going to rise up above that level because it's just a fact of having a good job and a good career. You're going to make more money and so forth. Now, you mentioned about money and the price of things and so forth. I go on that because, see, when I went to college, gas was 19.9. Well, that's 20 cents a gallon. It costs $3 to fill up the tank. Now it costs, well, of course, gas is down right now, temporarily, I guess. But now it costs, what, $60 to fill up the tank. Right. So anyway, everything that we're buying that you're talking about, if you go back about 50 years ago, everything is at least 10 to 20 times, I shouldn't say 10, everything is 20 times more than it was before. In other words, our purchasing power has been diminished by 20 times. So, and I give good examples in the book about, can of soup, pound of potatoes, everything you can think of, I show, pound of cheese. Anything you can think of, I show that the prices back then and the prices now are 20 to 30 times more than what they were. However, our wages are only 10 times more than they were before. So now we have less money to buy more expensive things. So what we've done is we've diminished our citizens' purchasing power. And that's all been done, I believe, through the manipulation of our currency by the Federal Reserve, because they're the ones who keep printing the money that causes the inflation. And the expansion of money, of currency, is what really causes inflation. So here we are in this situation where, us citizens are arguing amongst ourselves and discussing amongst ourselves, do we have a poverty level? What's a poverty level? What's a living wage? All those things. And the politicians are sitting back in Washington thinking, man, we got them screwed. They don't know what they're talking about. So that's the situation you're in, and I'm glad you pointed that out, because that's exactly where we are today. It's all relative. And so how do we go about doing this? Well, we have to start thinking as citizens. We got to look at who we elect, and are we really sending them off and telling them to do the job we want them to do, or are we just letting them go ahead and continue to get themselves reelected and earn 3.5 times more than the average American household for doing maybe one third of the work that we do? Mm-hmm. Hey, when they tell me they're fighting for us and they're working so hard, I can't buy it. I don't buy it. I've worked in underground coal mines. I know what it takes to work. I know what people do to work, to put in an 8-hour shift. I know what they do, and these politicians ain't doing that.
No, and especially coming out of one of the worst do-nothing Congresses in history. I mean, you do look at the the salaries they're being paid, and most of these guys. I mean, well, not most. Let me not say most, but a whole lot of them, a large percentage of them, go into these jobs already as millionaires. They're being paid, more than, a household and a full household. I mean, we're talking about, say, 2 young adults and 2 older adults in a household, and maybe even a guest is still not going to make the type of salary that these guys make to do virtually nothing, except seemingly line their own pockets and make deals. So this is, this is a problem as well.
Yeah. Now, I have a chapter on taxes also, and let's talk about that a little bit.
Okay.
Right now, do you have do you have some kind of an idea about how many different different types of taxes we have in the United States?
Oh yeah, I mean, if you put it all together, you have your, there's different types of taxes. First of all, far beyond the IRS thing and the withholdings from your checks and everything else. Every time you make a purchase, you're paying taxes. The gasoline, let's just say, I know that in the state of New Jersey, it ends up being 32.9 cents per gallon on every gallon of gasoline sold is just tax alone. You have your sales taxes, you have your various fees and everything else. So,
Okay, here's what my research has come up with. There's over 100 different types of taxes that are imposed on the citizens of this country. Now, do we really need that many taxes for us to live a good life? I don't think so. Now, if you go back 100 years ago, the income tax was created about the same time as the Fed, and back then the whole idea of the income tax, which we never had before, at least not in the type of format that we have it in now, was supposed to be 1%, and that the richest of the rich would pay maybe up to 7%. So that was the whole idea of the income tax, and the politicians laughed about, like, oh, they'll never know what's going on. I've got quotes on that. We'll just take the money from them, and they'll never know the difference. So anyway, we have all of these taxes. So now what the politicians have caused us to do, and we've really brought it on ourselves because we're voting for these guys and gals, is we argue about what should the corporate tax rate be? What should the capital gains tax rate be? So, and then you talk to people and you say, okay, what's the current capital gains tax rate? And most people won't have an idea. And if you're on the left side of the fence, you say, well, it should be at least 39% because that's what our party wants. And if you're on the other side, the right side of the fence, then you say, well, it should only be 15% or 20% or something like that. But if you talk to most people, no one knows exactly what the capital gains tax is or what it should be. So we argue amongst ourselves and we hate each other because we can't agree on what it should be. But I can tell you what it should be. And the people who cannot think outside the box will reject me. But those who start to think outside the box will see that I have the exact number for what the capital gains tax should be. And that number is 0. And let me explain why. It's immoral for a country to penalize the citizens of their own country for investing in their own economy. Think about that. Just think a little bit. Whoever came up with such a dastardly deed as to penalize and punish people for investing in their own economy? I mean, that's bizarre. It's ridiculous. And you know what? It doesn't. It hinders everything. It stops business investment. And who's paying for this? It's not the fat cats on Wall Street or the rich guys that live in the big mansions. It's all the working people who have 501ks and IRSs and so forth. We're the ones that get hit the hardest on the capital gains tax. We've got to pay that damn thing every year.
Well, yeah, by extension you do, but I also find it morally reprehensible that there is a cut paid on people's wages. To be honest with you, at some point, if you're going to collect taxes, there's a whole lot of problems. I mean, think about it. So your wages, your labor, which you are selling to someone, is only legal if you give the government their cut. You know what I mean? This becomes a problem in my mind, much larger than the capital gains tax in my mind. And I understand what you mean, though, because what you're really saying is that the capital gains tax winds up being handed on down to the consumer, to the laborer anyway. It's not something that's going to be really truly paid by the individuals that are making the investment anyway. This is what happens in business. Actually, is they pass along these things as part of their cost, right?
I merely brought up the capital gains tax as one that I think most of your listeners will relate to, and they'll understand where I'm coming from on that. But anyway, I looked at over 100 taxes, and I applied the same philosophy, same thinking to all of them as I did to this one, and that was the answer I came up with. What we have to do is we have to find a way that we can operate our government, because the government does need revenue. There's no question about it. We can't operate without revenue, but how much revenue we need and how it's going to be spent and where we're going to collect it from, that's what the issues are, and those are the types of mechanics that I solve in the book, how to go about doing all of that. The philosophy of it is really pretty simple. If back in 1913, before we had an income tax, our national debt was $2 billion, and now it's heading towards $20 trillion. That's a lot of difference in 100 years. That's quite a growth in national debt. And so has the income tax really helped that? I guess people would say, well, if we didn't have the income tax, the national debt would be $40 trillion. And I say, no, it wouldn't. It would be zero, or it'd be $2 billion, because the politicians wouldn't have the money to spend, and they wouldn't be able to overspend what they get. See, that's all part of the budgeting process. It's very, very easy for them to overspend because they think, okay, there's so much money coming in, we can spend a little bit more. It's kind of like solving my credit card problem by asking the credit card company, begging them to give me a higher credit limit. We're going to run into this in another month or so, aren't we, Chuck? Aren't they going to have to raise the debt ceiling again?
Well, right. They kicked the can down the road to February. I think it's at the very end of this month, right?
Yeah, in March. We're going to see the credit limit raised again. But are we going to see any cuts in spending? Oh, yeah, they're going to cut spending, okay. Obama's going to cut spending. The Republicans are going to cut spending. But what most of the people don't understand is when they say they're going to cut spending, that means that, our next year's budget is calling for let's say a 7% increase in spending across the board, so we're only going to increase at 6%, so that's a big cut. But it's not really a cut, is it? No, that's no cut. But that's what they do.
Well, you see, and that's the craziness of the business the way it stands now, is that they're talking about projected spending cuts and all this other stuff, but it's really a smaller increase, generally speaking. And meanwhile, there's got to be a limit to this somewhere. It's got to go bust at some point.
Mm-hmm. So, anyway, our economy's crumbling. We know that, and we can get into all the various solutions and argue them back and forth and debate them and decide, okay, should we do this one, should we do that one, and so forth. What we have to do is we have to do them all, but we have to get the people, the citizens of all the various the ideologies and political parties, we need to work together again. Heck, we go out to dinner with each other. Like I said before, we go to ball games together. We pray together. We stand together to sing the national anthem. And we root for the same home teams. We do all that stuff. So why do we fall into this? It's like a deep rabbit hole of politicians' promises and their political persuasions, because when you really get to the root cause of something, that's really where it's coming from. We can't work together we can't agree with each other because the politicians want to divide us. And that's what they're doing to us. You know, if you say, well, what's the solution to it? We've got to learn how to stand together and not let politicians divide us, because that's how they keep their power. The government has power because they have us divided. If we were all together, they couldn't get away with what they're getting away with. It just wouldn't work. And
Well, yeah, it's this plus the idea that that there are so many out there, and again, not too many of my listeners, but in reality, the majority out there, you know, place a trust in a politician. They place a trust in a political party. You know, if I vote for this guy and he gets in, he's going to do the things I want to see done, and they really don't know what the issues are. They really don't know what the operations are. They really don't even know what these guys stand for, except that they're wearing a red or a blue tie most of the time. You know, the constant support for, well, if I support this side, you know, everything will work out. If I support that side, it'll work everything out. You know, without actually dissecting what's going on and the actual functions that are occurring. You know, the votes. Nobody knows any of this stuff, it seems.
mm-hmm. You're absolutely right. What it boils down to, and you can see it, it's reflected in the polls. It's reflected in everything. You know, if we watch TV or listen to a radio show like this one or one of the other talk radio shows or whatever, we hear the same thing. We hear people who are so galvanized because what's happened to them is they've gotten to the point where they absolutely adore their politicians. And adoration of politicians is a form of insanity in my mind. How can we adore people who really have no interest in helping us at all? So, like you said before, a person votes for a politician because they think, well, they're going to get me this or they're going to get me that. But they don't really ever get us anything. We're paying for all this with our own money anyway. We're the ones who pay for it. They're not doing anything but kind of trying to come up with ideas that can get them reelected again. Do you realize that we've got, I think, I forget how many representatives and senators have been in Washington, D.C. for over 36 years? That's a lifetime. The founding fathers said the representatives would be gentlemen farmers and shopkeepers and craftsmen and so forth. Mill workers, you know, they weren't supposed to make a career out of this. So really, that's what's happening. They divide us, and they're driving us to insanity by having us adore these people. Why would anybody stand up for a politician and say, "Oh, my guy is great, but your guy is terrible. We can't vote for him," or, you know, he's a bad guy or whatever. In fact, think about it. We got polls say the Congress is what, 10 to 12% approval rating. That's not a whole lot. But if I ask somebody in the district I live in, what do you think of our guy? They say, oh, he's great. I say, well, what do you think about the guy in the next district? No, he's a bum. They got to get rid of him. Those people are stupid. They got to get rid of him. But if I go and talk to those people, they'll say, hey, your guy's a bum. He's stupid. You got to get rid of him. So does that make any sense? But that's exactly what's happening to us. They've gotten us to this point where we're just going. We're heading towards insanity by believing these people and what they tell us, because they're dividing us all the time. And
well, it comes down to the sentiment where, and you know, you mentioned sports, and I mentioned sports in this way, and it's not a positive way. Most of the time, the people that root for a sports team are rooting for a uniform. They're not rooting for the characters. They're not rooting for the particular individuals. They're not rooting for these guys are from my town. They're not rooting for I like this guy because he's a good guy. They're not rooting for anything except the uniform. So what happens is they've taken this sort of mentality like a sports fan, and transposed it onto politics, and think that if you pick the right uniform, if you pick the red or the blue side of the coin, that this is the right way. This is what you got to do, as opposed to looking at the particular individual, what their actual policies are, what the mechanism, by which they got themselves elected was, what their previous careers were. And you're exactly right that there was no intent for career politicians to exist in this country. That wasn't the idea, but yet it is the state we find ourselves in. I go back to when, Obama was first, out there as a candidate, and a whole lot of people that were supporting him, they would support him for various reasons. They'd say, well, he's actually going to lower taxes. And you'd say, well, listen, he's actually said that he's not going to lower taxes if you pay attention to what he's talking about here. Well, he's going to, get less government intrusion in our lives than W did. And I say, well, if you examine very carefully, he says he's going to be transparent, which I don't believe anyway. And of course, I've been proven extremely right. But the thing is, that's not what the man was even saying. People were supporting him based on God knows what, as opposed to even listening to what the guy was saying. So sometimes it's even irrelevant when these guys, are stumping and proclaiming things and making statements to try and get themselves elected, because people aren't even listening to their actual statements. They're not listening to their statements. They're not examining their behavior. They're not understanding where they're coming from, or taking a good look at what their philosophies are based on or anything else. They're just rooting for them based on I don't know what, because I can't even see the world in the same way, where I have to vote for a red or a blue tie. I never could.
Well, what's happened is Americans are being conditioned to think that way. And I love your analogy of the uniform. You're rooting for the uniform in a sense, and no matter who the person is, that's what we're rooting for. And boy, we can see that there's a lot of sports figures lately that aren't really the kind of people we should be rooting for. Although I guess right. if we look at from a Christian point of view, and I don't want to get into religion, but you'd say, well, they need help and we need to forgive them and so forth. I can understand all that, but there's certainly not people who we should be adoring like we do the politicians.
Well, but, see, I understand that, but you know what? For me, I take a step back and I think of it differently. The fact that people lionize these guys in the first place is the real problem. From my perspective, if you see a football player, if you see a baseball player, that's what their actual job is. They're not there to be a role model, in my estimation. Ascribing all these other things to them and saying, gee, look at their character and everything else, that's really not what they're there for. They're there for their talent. I think that if people looked at the politicians in the way that I look at these sports guys, we would have a different situation, because I want to look at the politician for what he has done, what he's going to do, what he's capable of. You know what I mean? And that's what's really important here. His sentimentality and everything else is really irrelevant if he turns around and he does the right thing. You know what I'm saying? If he does his job correctly, that's what I'm after. And just like when I look at a football player, look, the guy doesn't have control of his home life. This is not what's relevant to me as him as a football player. Him as a human being, that's another issue. And I really wish that everybody would learn to, live in a peaceful and good way, because it would be a better world if we all did. But to take a step back, the fact that people debate all these things about these sports figures and things, this is part of the problem. Is they're ascribing too much to somebody whose job it is to do something. You don't expect a politician to be your savior. Just try and get him to do his job, maybe. You know what I mean?
Yes. No, that's a great analogy, and it's a great point. Unfortunately, I guess throughout the history of mankind, though, we've looked to people with talents and so forth, and we ascribe to the fact that, wow, that guy is done something that's fantastic, or something that's out of the ordinary, something extraordinary, and so forth. But when we put that on politicians, how many times do we hear politicians referred to as leaders? I haven't seen I've seen very few politicians over the years that I would consider leaders. Now, I've read a lot of books on leadership. In fact, I've taught it as a course in my consulting assignments. Lincoln was a leader, and there's a lot of good examples of what his leadership traits were, his leadership characteristics were, and so forth. We don't have too many Lincolns running around Washington, D.C. or any place else in this country today. So we have to examine, why are we looking for these people to be leaders? Because certainly there's a higher percentage of them, congressmen in jails and in breaking the law, than there are the NBA and the NFL players. Their rates are even higher. So we're looking at them and we say, okay, let's examine what a politician can do. In my mind's eye, and I may be myopic about this, but I've seen politicians with two main traits, or two skills. One is speech making, and the next one is fundraising. And they're really very good at both of those. So when you boil it down into, me sitting with you in the sports bar, having a beer, we say what they're really good at is bullshooting us out of our money. That's really what it boils down to. They make great speeches to talk us out of giving them our money.
Right, and some of them are well packaged as products, via commercialism and all that, which, I claim that's exactly what Barack Obama was, is he was a well packaged product for the consumer out there, which caused people to believe that there was going to actually be something that would be like hope and change. And I'm very fond of saying, what really should have been said then was abandon all hope and begin to beg for change, because nothing was going to get any better with this guy. He was going to be a continuation of the previous regime. And really, that's what I have seen, throughout the past few decades, is nothing but a continuation of the previous policies, repackaged and sort of, resold to different segments of the population so that the agenda continues. And the downward slide has absolutely continued. The last guy that seemed to be a leader, in my estimation, and I put Ronald Reagan aside because I've got lots to say about him, but let's just put him aside for a moment. The last guy that really represented himself as a leader in the public's eye, as it were, was John F. Kennedy. And that's a sad state of affairs, that it's been half a century since we had anybody who seemed to be a leader, who seemed to be inspirational, in the public's mind. I mean, this is the guy who said we would go to the moon. This is the guy who said we would, rebuild and build things and do things differently, and absolutely inspired, different industries to do things. And young people even had sort of, somebody that, and of course this guy was not, godlike in any sense. I mean, we've learned a great many of his failures as a person over the years, and some of them are exaggerated, but that's beside the point. The thing is that as a leader, as someone who could inspire and motivate, masses of individuals, he was effective. And yes, that hasn't been the case from the executive branch, I contend, ever since then. And of course, all the way down the line, it's only gotten worse and worse.
I agree, and that's a great look at it. Also, there's no question about we're voting for these people, we're electing these people, and we have fallen into this trap of paradigm paralysis, whereby we can't think outside the box, and so we just continually elect and re-elect people who are not leaders, people who are very good at making speeches, very good at fundraising. They're very good at protecting their assets also. Chuck, let me ask you a question. I've been doing a lot of research. I try to stay away from the current affairs because they're all just pretty much symptomatic of the overall problem that we have in Washington. My goal is to make the country great for all Americans and not get into, various trade agreements and different things like that, although I try to stay up to date on all of them and, and be as knowledgeable as I possibly can. But let me ask you a question on the Keystone Pipeline. I presume you've been following that fairly closely.
Not as closely as I was, but yeah, I've been keeping up on it.
Here's what I've been finding out about this, and of course, I don't know what I can believe, and what I should believe or can believe, or what I should not believe, because how do we know if the sources are good? You can even try and fact check and verify things, and then you find out they're still not correct. But anyway, to send a barrel of oil from Canada down to the United States through a pipeline would cost us, I think, something like $9 a barrel. And your listeners probably all know the right answer to this, and they're saying that guy doesn't know what he's talking about. But it's something like that, less than $10 a barrel. Mm-hmm. Right now, that oil is coming into the United States of America. It's coming into our country, but it's coming into us by rail. Okay, so there's a railroad, the Burlington Northern Santa Fe, that's transporting oil into the United States at a cost of $30 a barrel. So transportation cost is $30 a barrel, and if we were sending it through the pipeline, it would be about 1/3 or 1/4 of that price. So this whole thing, from what I've been able to find out, and I would like somebody to inform me or enlighten me or correct me or whatever. What I'm finding out is that Burlington Northern Santa Fe is generating about $2 billion in transportation revenues from shipping the oil from Canada to the United States. Are you familiar with any of that?
Yeah, I understand where you're going here. Yeah.
You understand where I'm coming from. So then if I owned Burlington Northern Santa Fe Railroad, I would probably be against the Keystone Pipeline. Wouldn't I lobby against that? Wouldn't I try and persuade people to say, no, we can't have that pipeline? And even if I had to say, well, it's going to damage the environment, or it's not going to create jobs like everybody says it is, or it's a bad idea, it can cause a disaster or something like that, I guess I would stoop to just about any kind of argument that I could come up with to keep that pipeline from being built so I could protect my $2 billion of annual revenue. Does that make sense?
Oh, yeah.
Okay. Who owns Burlington Northern Santa Fe Railroad? I mean, that's the next logical question, isn't it?
Right. Let's figure out whose interest it is to keep it that way. Mm-hmm.
Well, the best I can find out, it's owned by Berkshire Hathaway.
Okay.
Okay. Who owns all the stock in Berkshire Hathaway? Warren Buffett.
Oh, Buffett does. Okay.
And who's Obama's number one supporter? Warren Buffett. So why does Obama not want to sign the Keystone Pipeline? Is the Democrat Party contributions going to dry up if Warren Buffett loses $2 billion in revenue? Maybe he's not going to be as
his generosity may dry up along with it. Yeah.
So anyway, I think that all the statistics and numbers I've given you are accurate, or they're as accurate as I've been able to find out. Some of these things are very difficult to sort out. But if what I'm saying is true, and I'm saying that what I'm saying is true because I can't verify it, I can only do the research I can do and find the things I can find. If that's true, then the Keystone Pipeline is not really anything other than a political issue. So what's happening is I'm getting back to my book now. When we first started talking, the whole idea of the book is to find solutions for America to make America great. And what we're doing is we've got politicians who are making decisions based on what will help their political party, not necessarily the American citizen. And that's what drove me to write my book, and that's what drove me to look at everything the way I'm looking at and saying, politics have always been in existence. It's always been happening, but it's never been as partisan as it is right now, where they've divided us so completely into hating each other because they can stay in power that way.
And really what this is to get the public, divided into these camps so that they root for, these two different sides. And at the end of the day, what you've illustrated here is that for the most part, it is the larger business interests that are being served by the politicians because they have the money to get it done. This is what the reality is, and that's why I say all the time that we have entered into an era of corporatism or even fascism at this point, because what has gone on in this country is that the corporation has become a much more important thing to the politician, to the individuals that are supposed to be out there representing us. They're really representing their corporate paymasters. That's what they're doing. And of course, the pipeline is a perfect example of that. And that's why I dropped away from following it a lot, because I realized that this is, again, millionaires and billionaires shuffling chips amongst themselves and arguing over who gets to sit where at the poker table. And at the end of the day, this is not for the benefit of the American public. The debate is a distraction. And just something else to sort of add to the reasons why you're supposed to vote for one side of the existing paradigm or another. And that's all it is, in my estimation.
Exactly. And who's actually getting hurt by this? If it's you and me and our neighbors and our friends and our family and so forth, because when we go, we need our automobiles because we have to, go shopping, we have to go to work, we have to go to church, we have to do all these things, and we rely on automobiles to do that. And we need heating oil in some areas for the people in the winter to stay warm and so forth. And so what's happening is, if we're paying 3 times to 4 times as much for transportation of oil, of energy, then who's actually paying for that? We're paying for that at the pump. We're paying that to the utility companies. We're paying that to someone because that cost is there. And so we have to find ways to reduce the cost of goods and services. And the politicians, in a sense, are controlling that. They turned over the manipulation of the currency to the Fed, and they manipulate and hold us hostage on issues like the Keystone Pipeline. Now, I'm sure there's a lot of reasons, pro and con, of why the Keystone Pipeline should be in existence or it shouldn't be. But just as an example, it's costing us 3 to 4 times more to transport that oil, which means we're paying a heck of a lot more money every time we go to the pump to buy gas, but nobody's giving us a raise. Nobody's telling us, we're gonna make it so you have more money. If the only time we ever get more money is through inflation, which we end up costing us more money in the long run anyway. So there's something that has to be done about that, and I like to think that I solved it all in my book.
Well, that means that you have a solution in there that somehow takes the monetary gain out of politics, right? I mean, because that's the reality here. That's what it really comes down to, is that we have to take the incentive away from the politician to adhere to the money game a whole lot more than they do to the interests of the American public. So, I know you probably can't lay the entire thing out right away, but I mean, give us a basic idea of what your solution is to that, because I often wonder, how do you get the money out of the politics, you know?
Okay, chapter 16 of the book is a chapter that many of my friends who helped me edit the book, they said, you got to make that chapter 1. I said, no, it can't be chapter 1 because it doesn't fit in the flow that way. They said, well, that's the only chapter you'll get everybody to agree on. And chapter 16 is on Congress and term limits. So I kind of addressed two issues there in one chapter. Did you know that Thomas Jefferson was against was for term limits? And Benjamin Franklin actually had term limits in the Pennsylvania Assembly. That was a controversial issue. And what's happened is, when I talked about before, when I did all this research and I found out all these all these congressmen who've been serving for so many years, that I broke it down, and so many served over 50 years, and so many over 36 years, and so many over 20 years, and et cetera, is that we need to have a rotation of authority. And that's what it boils down to. If we have a rotation of authority, then politicians aren't going to be able to get themselves entrenched deep enough to where they can affect all these things, and they'll have to start going to work for America, because the American people will now have choices and there'll be competition. Right now, there's no competition for a lot of these congressmen. It's whoever has the most money out of the bat, and coming out of the gate is the one who's going to get reelected. Look what's happening in the presidential campaign. Of course, we do have term limits there in a sense. We have one party that they say, well, they've already got $1 billion raised. Well, is that the best thing for America, to have a politician have $1 billion, and now the other party's scrambling around with about 15 or 20 different people trying to see if they can raise $1 billion to make it a close race?
Well, let me just say this. We're down to just about the last 20 minutes, and I want to throw a couple things in on what you just said. First of all, Thomas Jefferson was one of the most brilliant minds that we ever had in this country. So anytime you cite him, I'm almost always going to agree. Again, not a perfect human being, but definitely a brilliant one. Here's the thing. And this is what occurs to me when it comes to term limits. You think term limits will solve it in and of itself because you'll have to have people rotating in and out of those positions? See, I don't see it that way, and I'll tell you why. Excuse me. The first thing is that, as we have observed, or at least in my mind, as I have observed, the office of the presidency, although there are term limits which are built in there, we have seen the continuation of the same policies over and over again. We have seen one hand washing another, and in my estimation, sort of just handing off the baton. Now, that sort of thing could happen in the Congress as well, where you have, the same families involved, the same types of individuals involved in a cooperative sense, and it might not get any better. It does sort of solve the problem of the individual enrichment, which is going on, with these guys who are there for 30 years. I mean, by the time they leave office, they don't leave like Harry Truman left the presidency, without any money. These guys always leave with a huge golden parachute, a guaranteed job, no matter if they were a senator from nowhere or if they were from the largest state in the union. They always seem to have worked themselves into a way that, into a retirement plan that most of us out here in the real working world could never even dream of. You know what I mean? So I'm wondering if you think that all by itself would be the solution, because to me it seems like the game would change a bit, but it might still get played the same way. Also, even in a single or say if you give them 2 terms at a time, maybe that would even make it worse, because they would have to very quickly pillage and plunder in their positions, as opposed to taking their time and just making sure they're being reelected.
I like that analogy. What you're saying is they'd put the full court press on us, wouldn't they?
That's one of the downfalls I see to term limits, is that
Yeah.
it could actually make the situation a little worse from the most corrupt ends of this spectrum. The people that really want to be career politicians, okay, they could get their term limits in. Say they spend 2 terms in Congress, then they spend 2 terms in the Senate. Then they move on to a cabinet post which doesn't have a term limit. You know what I mean? This kind of thing still could go on without a problem. They would change job titles, but they would still be in a position to pillage and plunder if they made the right deals.
Yes, I agree, and I can't disagree with what you're saying. Term limits is not the end-all solution. It's just one of the many solutions of the 27 various issues that I've come up with. We have to do them all, and when we do them all, then it will put the politicians in a position where they cannot control all the things that they do now. Right now, just to put term limits on now, you're right, it probably wouldn't make a whole lot of difference. It might help a little bit in some cases, but probably not. We have to have a comprehensive plan of attack. We have to have a comprehensive escape plan from tyranny to solve all these problems. And what I'm noticing today also is all these problems that I started working on 30 years ago, back in the 1980s, I'm starting to hear people on TV and on the radio say, oh, what if we did this? What if we did this with the VA? Or what if we did that with education or immigration or the UN or whatever? So you're right. Just to do one thing, it won't work. But if you read my book and you read the chapter and you see everything in there, you'll say, yeah, I think we really need to take a real hard look at imposing term limits. And I'm not looking at term limits on just Congress. I'm also looking at it from the point of view of the Supreme Court. We have people on the Supreme Court that they seem like they're on there forever. They're on there for lifetimes, and you know what that does? That stifles the younger people coming up. We need to have fresh people come in and sit in those seats, and why have people in their 80s and 90s on the Supreme Court, and then have all the young people coming up never have the opportunity to even be considered for that position, because some people have lorded over it like they're like they're royalty in a sense. And
Right.
I think that that's another part of it too. So anyway, the term limits part of it, I go into some pretty deep detail on every elected position and appointed position in the country, and describe them.
Well, and I do agree with you that the lifetime appointment to the U.S. Supreme Court has always kind of taken me aback. Even when I learned about it as a kid, I said to myself, well, why in the world would you allow a judge to sit there until they die? The first thing that occurred to me is, quite often that people toward the ends of their lives become kind of impaired mentally, and so to me it seemed to be a big problem that to have somebody interpreting the constitutional nature of court cases, in the twilight of their lives might not be the best solution in the world to the problem. And that was, I was a kid thinking that, of course I've got a more textured view of it now, but my basic premise remains the same in my mind. Listen, before we run out of time, though, I do want you to be able to tell listeners exactly where they can find your book, your website, everything else. You can find Bill Muckler on Facebook, Twitter. I posted that stuff in the chat room, but I'd like you to tell the listeners who aren't in the chat room where they can find all these things.
Okay. If one of the listeners is on Facebook, it's pretty easy to find. They can find Bill Muckler, Muckler, and I'm on Facebook. I've got my whole life laid out on Facebook. I've got nothing to hide. I'm not trying to cover anything up. it's all there to see. My birthday, my hometown, everything I've done all my life is on there. Where every school I've attended, and so forth. So anyway, you can go there. There's also a Facebook page that's called 2020: A Clear Vision for America, and that takes you to the book homepage. And if you get to my homepage, you can get to the book homepage back and forth. It doesn't make any difference. But the actual book title itself is 20/20: A Clear Vision for America. And the book, everything in the book, all the solutions revolve around the number 20. And that's why I ended up with 20 chapters. I probably could have had 27 chapters if I wanted to, separate it out that way. But anyway, I think I have no fascination for the number 20. Doesn't make any difference to me. $20 bill hardly buys you anything anymore. So 20s is no big deal, other than the fact that the solutions all seem to work out with the number 20. Okay, and my Twitter account is Bill2020. I guess it's twitter.com/Bill2020. The website for the book is 2020americabook.com. So and actually, something that see, I'm not a celebrity like you are, Chuck. I'm just an average guy down here in Florida.
I'm not a celebrity, Bill. Whoa.
Who's doing this on my own? It's just me and my son. And he is helping me because I guess hopefully he loves me or something like that, and is trying to make sure I don't fall down and kill myself or something like that. So he helps me with a lot of stuff. But anyway, the website is www.2020americabook.com. And then you can, when you go there, it'll direct you to various articles I've written and that type of thing. And it'll also give you a synopsis of about the author, so it tells everything about me, and it tells a little bit about the book. And then there's a link that sends you to Smashwords to buy the book, or it'll send you to Barnes and Noble. And I guess I jumped ahead of myself. You can actually Google, and this is what impressed me. I actually went on Google and I put in 20/20: A Clear Vision for America, and guess what? I came up on Google, so people can even Google me now. And I never would have thought that a few years ago. I didn't think that I was ever worthy of Google, but I guess I am now.
Well, it cracked me up the first time I saw a bunch of pages with my stuff on it, too. It really did. And just for everybody's clarification, you spell Bill's last name Muckler.
Yes.
Just so you know you got the right guy. And it's Bill Muckler or William Muckler. But I think on Facebook you're Bill Muckler. So yes, that's the easiest place to find him. And, of course, hey, Google him, too. And you'll see all those other wonderful links. And partially the reason why I ended up having you on the show was because somebody pointed me, because I'm always asking people, who would you like to hear on the show? And somebody pointed me to some of your comments and some of your pages and things like that. And I said, well, you know what? This seems interesting, and I want to read your book. So I will get to it, by the way, and we'll probably do a follow-up on this where I'll go more in depth in the specifics with your book, if you have the time, and that's what we'll do. Now, I'm just down to the last 10 minutes here, and I want to thank everybody who decided to tune in. Regardless of what it is you decided to use to listen to us tonight, or if you're catching us further downstream on YouTube, or actually I'm not posting on SoundCloud anymore, but if you're catching it on the archives or wherever else, I want to thank you for listening. The Ochelli Effect, which also you can find on Facebook. There's a discussion group on there, and there's also a page for it. You can also just find me. If you can spell my last name, that's always the fun part. Excuse me, Ochelli. Just look for that, and generally speaking, you'll find me first. I really do appreciate your time tonight, and I know it's a long show, but you know, definitely, I'm sure that we've reached some people that might have not gotten to hear about your book otherwise, and I find it very interesting, especially when we're talking about solutions. We can often point to the problems that are there, and I'm very good at saying things are bad. I'm very good at saying that things are problematic. I'm very good at pointing out the inequities in the system, and the fact that I feel as though the entire system has failed. But it is refreshing to hear somebody with the ideas about trying to repair the situation as opposed to simply pointing out the pitfalls of it. So, in the last few minutes here, I wonder if there's anything you sort of want to add. I always say this to everybody. You know, if there's one general message, one thing that you want people to take away from our discussion tonight, your appearance in general, what would it be?
First of all, I'm delighted to be on the show, and I thank you so much for the opportunity to be able to talk with you and also present something to your listeners who probably have heard about this for the first time. The whole idea of the book is to give our children a bright future and to give us something to work with where we can make our lives better and we can start giving our children something to look forward to. So that's really what the book is all about. I'm all about defending the Constitution of the United States, supporting it. I don't know if I should really say any more than that because I would probably overdo it. But somehow we got to get the word out to people that there is a way to operate this country for Americans and not for politicians, and we have to do it in a smart way. And I don't think I'm a very smart guy, but I think that I'm really very good at problem solving and sorting out problems and coming up with solutions. I think I've developed that technique over the years. And so I would hope that a lot of people would just go, for example, to Barnes and Noble, and you don't even have to put your name or anything in there. You can just go in there and click on there, and you can start reading away. And if you read a few chapters and you say, "Hey, I think I want to learn some more about this," then I would be delighted if you would buy the book. I'm not in this for the money. In fact, my son and I have discussed this, and all the profits from this book are going to go to my favorite charity, which is for the kids, Marine Corps Toys for Tots.
Oh, well, I didn't even know that. That's really cool, actually, and that's one of the few charitable organizations that I've consistently given to is Toys for Tots, because I just it reaches at my heart, and it's one of those things that I think is actually worthy of what little I can spare on occasion. So, that's great. I had no idea about that, actually. Well, like I said, we are down to the last, say, 5 minutes or so, and then my obnoxious bumper is going to kick in. I think we're going to have to do this again, though, after I read your book, I'm telling you. And, I again appreciate all your time. I know it's a little bit tiring to go through 2 hours with me sometimes, and I do have a tendency to ask a lot of odd questions. But I'm trying to get at the meat of a lot of these issues, and I would really love to see our country return to what I thought it was supposed to be, what I do believe has been incrementally stolen from us by the corporate interests via their puppet politicians. I am thoroughly sick and tired of the situation. Whether we can fix the system or it needs to be completely torn away and redone, I'm not sure. I got to be honest with you, but you know what? Sometimes it does take uncommon sense to solve problems that seem to only require common sense solutions. So don't disparage yourself and say that you're not a smart guy. Sometimes boiling things down to their most simple elements, getting to the most reasonable and direct solution is the best way. And I actually look forward to seeing exactly what the ins and outs of all these solutions are. And again, it is 2020, A Clear Vision for America, and is available on barnesandnoble.com and also the websites which Bill did just give you out there. And I have dropped all that stuff in the chat room. He's on Twitter at Bill2020. And you can find him on Facebook if you know how to spell his last name. Once again, Muckler. And, Bill, it's, again, just these last couple of minutes, I'm really glad that you came on and we talked about all this stuff. And I'm not even necessarily saying that I agree with everything that you had to say, but you're definitely going in the right direction. And I'll have to look at the details myself because, see, I don't just simply ascribe faith in anybody, until I've examined what it is they're talking about. You know what I mean? But I hope that you've gotten your points across the way you wanted to tonight. And what else can I say except thanks?
Well, you're welcome, and I would be delighted to be on again. And when we get the book in the print, and more people have read it, and it's more readily available to more people, I'll be happy to get into and discuss solutions. If you want to, I'll spend 2 hours on a chapter if you like. Going through it and showing people how America can be, and that's really what we're all talking about. What America can really be.
Right, and of course, my closing thought for the day is very simple. It goes right along with Bill's. The whole reason why I do what I do, the whole reason why I spend time, putting this show together and trying to get, the good information out there is because I do want to see a better future, not just for my children, but for everybody's children, for the time when, yes, the old men will plant the trees and never sit in the shade. That's fine. I have no problem with never sitting in the shade. I'm more than happy to plant the trees, and hopefully I've given you guys a couple of seeds now and then so that you might be able to plant your own trees and think for yourselves. Examine everything for yourselves. Be informed and inform others as best you can, because the bottom line is that together we may be able to stand up, but completely divided, we will all certainly fall into our own personal holes that many, many more people than ourselves are more than happy to dig for us, because it is profitable, because it is expedient, because it is the thing they do. Regardless of what you think their motivations are, this is the traps that are out there. This is what has been done to our country. This is what has been done to our planet. This is what has been done to humanity in a way. Over time, we have had a lot of our freedom stolen from us. We have had a lot of the realities that we were intended to have in front of us virtually stolen from us, not overnight, but incrementally. So incrementally, we must improve it. We must change the situation. And that is about all there is to that. So I want to thank everybody once again for listening to the Ochelli Effect at ucy.tv/TOE. And yeah, you can find me on Facebook. And email address. All that stuff is actually at the TOE page, ucy.tv/TOE now. But in case you don't go there and you're just listening on an app or something, CHUCK1972 at Lycos, LYCOS.com. That is my regular email address, and I take all questions, comments, suggestions, and everything there. Complaints also. Thanks a lot. I get plenty of those. But, so Bill Muckler was the guest tonight, and 2020 Clear Vision for America. That is about all the time we have, and that obnoxious bumper is just about to hit us. Let's see. How long will it take? The automated thing, my clock is still off a little bit. Should be there. Coming up. And nope, not just yet. Come on now. This is what I hate about this, is that when my clock is not exactly right, sometimes I tail off and I finish off what I'm saying and it doesn't kick in. Come on. Let's go. Do. It'll do it. Trust me, it will. It's going to get noisy in just a second. There.
webcam microphone up close.
Webcam microphone up close.
At the age of 19 in 1962, she was a.
See, but I have the files. You know, I read this stuff at the National Archives, and I read these other things. I said to myself, how can that be possible? You know, days and the final slap of choice on computers, internet, professional wrestlers, and not just Ventura style. It doesn't matter where the information comes from as long as it's real. It doesn't take hard to get real information. Because seriously, it matches.